Good morning, campers, and welcome to Radio Camp Half-Blood, a Percy Jackson read-along podcast. I'm B.
And I'm Zach.
And this week, we read Chapter 5 of Percy Jackson, The Titan's Curse, A Place in Underwater Phone Call.
But so this week we read this wonderful chapter, which has a lot going on compared to last chapter, which is like almost nuts. It's like such a weird juxtaposition when you have something like that, where it's just like the last chapter is like, not much happened. And here it's just an actual like physical tidal wave of exposition just happens.
Oh yeah, this is definitely like an exposition chapter, because like I guess nothing physically happens in the plot. Like they arrive at Camp Half-Blood, they stay at Camp Half-Blood, they walk around and sort of talk about the different characters and where they are at mentally and emotionally in the plot. So that's kind of like what this chapter serves to do. Like, oh, what's Chiron up to? What's Mr. D up to? Being terrible, turns out. He's always being terrible. Is Clarice still there? What's going on with Grover? Like, there's just sort of like, it's an update of every character, basically, happens in this chapter. I don't think they forget a single, like, main character in this. They mention almost everybody. Gotta give you a little bit of an update.
Well, you have to have something like that, either that or they have to be covered within the next couple chapters, because all the kids would be like, where's Chiron? Where's Mr. D? Where's the Stoll brothers? Where's Beckendorf? Like, these characters that have been already established in the other books. Obviously, the first thing that Percy Jackson would have to do is he'd have to talk to his, mentor, which is Chiron, and then he'd have to like talk to Mr. D, which my favorite thing about this is what he wears, but we'll get to that because I think it's the funniest aesthetic.
Oh god, his outfit is... I didn't realize how terrible his outfit was until it was described in this chapter. Does he always wear that? Is that just something I didn't notice before, that he wore like really bad athletic gear, or...
Nah, B, that's like Christmas wear for him, because we have to talk about the most important thing. The most important thing that I've always found and laughed about in magical stories is when they celebrate Christmas and they have magical powers. It's like, in Harry Potter, it's like, well, we're witches and wizards, but we'll still celebrate the birth of Jesus.
The birth of Jesus, but also Santa Claus. Like, yeah, there's a lot of like weird implications to that. I mean, even in Narnia, they meet Santa, right? Is it explicitly Santa? Father Christmas, whatever he is? I don't know.
No. It legitimately is Santa, because Santa gives them all their weapons, and it is Santa.
Yeah, like, Santa's like, here's a sword. You'll stab your eye out, kid.
Well, I could use my Santa powers to murder everybody, but I can also arm children. Yep, all in a day's work in World War II.
All the modern Santa myth stuff is based on, I don't know, like a number of things, but usually it's like pagan stuff and other stuff, but like I don't think that it would track all the way back to ancient Greece, so I don't know if Santa would be involved in their winter celebration, right? Because it's not really Christmas, but they just have like Christmas lights, I guess.
I mean, isn't it like chestnuts roasting on a small ball of fire?
Yep, exactly.
So let's get into the story a little bit. So the chapter kind of opens up, and luckily Percy, Thalia, and all the wonderful hunters of Artemis did not kill anybody when they crashed the bus into the lake, which is even funnier.
Which is a miracle, honestly, that happened. Then we, like later on in this chapter, we're going to talk about that the whole driving thing was not nearly as lighthearted as we even originally thought, because I was like reading into it from the perspective of like, oh, well, she's just like stressed about responsibility, but we'll talk about other reasons why someone would be concerned about driving, I guess.
Well, yes, and this is what was kind of hard to talk about, because it's like, oh, I know the reason, but I'm like, oh, darn, I can't talk about it. And here I can finally talk about it. And we also learned a little more about, Thalia's past, as well as a lot more interesting things about Percy Jackson as a person.
This is jam-packed with exposition in some ways. You kind of mentioned that. I mean, they kind of have to explain how the camp is different now, too, because it's not just like it's like the holidays or whatever's going on with the lights, but there is also the fact that it's winter, which that's only the like year-round campers are there, so there's a very different feel to camp. It's not like the summer camp where there's a ton of people, there's only like a few people, and they like let the snow come in for some reason, so everything's a little bit more quiet and restrained.
You would think that like it'd be more suspicious if someone like saw off in the distance it just everything's powdered with snow, and then there's just this green summer camp. You're like, huh,
That's true. But do you think that the mist would just hide that? Because the mist hides them anyway.
Yes, but also I feel like it's a matter of just Rick Riordan needed to have a different aesthetic than just writing, it was a summer camp again.
Right, exactly. Because then you could easily have just been like, oh well, magically it's kept to summer camp because we show that that's true when it comes to the barrier that the golden fleece creates with the magic tree, like that. They're temperature controlled. Even Percy mentions that. Like that's what the island that they find the golden fleece on in Sea of Monsters is, like perfectly beautiful weather because that's what the golden fleece does. It has like nature magic.
I don't know, like New York City has some like harsh like nature magic where it's just like everything's cold and miserable, even if it should be happy. It's cold and miserable and
Even
rains.
if you have a golden
Even
fleece.
if you have a golden fleece, it's null and void in that New York weather.
It's true. It's been very windy here. I would describe New York as a combination of adorable in some ways and terrible in other ways. And I think the weather does both. It's like, oh, it's snowing. How cute. Anyway, all of the power is out and we can't leave our homes. Yay!
But luckily, no one is hurt in the crash and everyone's all happy, except like Grover's like, I'll help you, hunters. I'll show you guys where to find the camps because Zoe's not the nicest person in the world. And she's just like, okay, girls, let's go to the cabin. And Grover's like, I'll help you guys. I know this place like the back of my hand. Ooh, that's new, as he like falls into a stop sign for some weird reason.
Like the back of his hoof. Yeah, I kind of can't believe that they actually go with him.
Well, I mean, Grover's like such like a lighthearted person. Like that's something that he would do, including when it's a person that has like their heart has to be at a constant -3 degrees, or any shred of happiness will kill them.
Yeah, I just like love the description of like, oh really, it's no trouble. It's easy to get lost here if you don't. He tripped over a canoe and came up still talking. Like my old daddy goat used to say, come on.
Yeah, he has a very like Phil aspect of Grover, even though he's a cynic, usually is an optimist before he's cynical.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the circumstances. It's funny that he's trying to be like overly friendly to them. Well, we've established, right, that Grover has like a weird reverence for Artemis, so I guess that has something to do with it too. He's sort of a fanboy.
Oh yeah, no, because he's a satyr. They believe, the goddess of the hunt, and that's so metal. Like, I imagine, like, you go to his hovel, and he has a picture of Pan, and then he has a picture of, like, Artemis, but, like, in, like, a rock and roll poster. Like, one of those cheesy, like, One Direction posters.
Oh, I was just thinking that he would have it like in a locket, like Helga Pataki has a picture of Arnold, like, Arnold, my sweet Arnold.
Oh, football head.
Yeah, exactly. How I love you, and yet I hate you.
Now, here's a little piece I like to call everyone hates the Hunters of Artemis, but for some reason, every male is just infatuated with them.
Even though that they hate every dude, so it's kind of like this funny dynamic where they're like, oh, hey, well, yeah, you're the Hunters of Artemis, and then they're just like, get away from me, you disgusting man.
Well, for me, I just think it's funny because it's like one of those things where it's just like a funny comedic setup, even though it's like, well, it's almost like, I guess the best way to put it is it's the forbidden fruit, even though for some weird reason, like all the guys know the fact that they can't be obtained, but they still try anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of makes sense, I think. It's like playing hard to get, like, oh, well, because we know that you're not allowed to, like, fall in love. Or I guess they are allowed to, but then they can't be hunters anymore. So that's the punishment.
I guess it's the equivalent of, like, what is it, in England with, like, trying to get the guards to laugh?
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's like, that rule is in place, so you try to break that rule.
And it's one of those things where in this chapter we also see, the Hunters of Artemis are super cold, but then here we go again. We see Bianca finally like kind of like go with the hunters, and Nico's like, hey, where are you going? And she just like whispers in Nico's ear, and like he just like all the light in his eyes just like flood out, and she just walks away. And it's just like, I need a sad violin.
It was so sad. This made me really sad. Yeah, I was kind of upset by this because it's like, it doesn't even seem like they have an extended conversation about it. She's just sort of like, yeah, so this is my new family now. Goodbye.
Goodbye, you disgusting man. Wait, what? Aren't you my sister?
her like immediate jumping on board with this. I mean, we've talked about this already, but especially like this chapter demonstrates how she's already sort of assimilated into the culture of the Hunters of Artemis. Like the scene where they're all sitting around at their respective cabin tables, which again is super bizarre. I've talked about this, that the cabin segregation thing like is kind of uncomfortable. Like it's an arbitrary thing. Like, oh well, new campers go. What cabin do new campers go to?
It's Hermes' cabin.
Hermes' cabin, right? Yeah, they go to Hermes because that they're like it's the god of travelers, so they go there first. So that's where Nico ends up. It's already like a very pared back group of people, as Percy explains in the beginning of the chapter, because it's the middle of winter and the year-round campers aren't there, and then some of the year-round campers are missing for various reasons, like Clarice, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, like that scene, they're sitting like at the dining table or whatever, each like sort of sequestered to their own cabin. Percy's all by himself, obviously, because even Tyson isn't there anymore. And you look over at the Hunters of Artemis and his description of them like all laughing and talking to each other, and immediately Bianca's sort of like immersed herself into this group and she's like comfortable with it, and then Nico has to be with Hermes' cabin and like is being sort of swindled by the Beckendorf brothers about playing poker.
Yeah, like when it comes to like the weird like segregation, the only way I can actually like think of it in like the logical standpoint is that again, it is a summer camp and that Rick Riordan had to make it in this way where it's just, in theory, during the summer, there's going to be a lot of people. The idea of having the big three is kind of like just like an honorific, because even though Hera has a cabin, she wouldn't have children because she's the goddess of marriage. It's just you need to appease the gods or bad things will happen. But I see what you're saying. Like you would imagine during the wintertime when there's like 6 people, why don't you guys like go into like one table? Like it's just one of those things that just happens.
Well, it's always uncomfortable for like certain campers because obviously, yeah, okay, there's like multiple Hermes campers, there's multiple.
So here's the catch-22. The only person that feels like that is Percy because he's an only child, whereas all the other gods have multiple children because they're totally fine with
Talia
like
also doesn't have anybody.
Well, that's the same thing. It's like it's the big 3. It's like they're not supposed to have kids.
So they're being punished for like the transgressions of their parents in a way that they have to like be sadly sitting alone. It just feels
Yeah, it's the sins of the father goes to the sins of the son.
Which I think is definitely like a theme of this series in general to some extent, because there's definitely like this idea that like the machinations of like the decisions that your parents make really impact who you are and the life that you lead, but you're not really allowed to speak against it or even really talk to them, and they can't like even intercede on your behalf to make things easier for you. So there's like obviously like this weird tension about like living up to what your cabin represents and what your parents represent.
Well, it's supposed to be something kind of like a caste system almost, where it's like if your god's better than the other gods, like you're going to be treated much differently. As well as when it comes to this story, it's the idea of the weird period of time where it's like, hey, everybody, don't you like to be in groups because they fit your personality? Cough, cough, Harry Potter, cough, cough, Percy Jackson, cough, cough, Hunger Games, like... there's a lot more stories when it comes to it. Even I'm going to give it a more obscure example. In The Worst Witch, they also have houses.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, that makes so much sense. Like, even, I think about how J.K. Rowling decided to make, like, an American version of Hogwarts, basically. And even in that, she had to make houses, too. Like, as if that would be really a thing in America, because that's, I mean, I guess it's sort of based off of like the idea, right, that like there are houses in like boarding schools in England, and that's more of a tradition there, but that's not really a tradition here, but that's like mapped onto the version in America. And I definitely think it's because of that like tendency to want to like separate people into like specific groups on arbitrary traits.
So in America, I'm just imagining, like, I know how it's supposed to be because I've read all the Pottermore stuff on it, but I just imagine them to be like gigantic like frat houses almost, and sororities.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Frats are sort of, but I mean, even frats though are not like compulsory the way that like boarding school houses are. Like you're just sort of assigned a house when you're in a boarding school. Well, like if you're going to a college, you can opt into participating in Greek life, like a sorority or a fraternity. But then there are also schools that don't even have those. Like my college didn't have a fraternity or a sorority or a football team for that matter. But I went to a weird school.
Yeah, I mean, okay, when it comes to like the idea of just different cultures, that's the idea of in Harry Potter, let's just use J.K. Rowling because it's a good example of taking something that's so British and bringing it into an American feel, is that if you didn't have that, people would complain because like, why is there not houses?
People would complain because they want to sort themselves into, because that's why it became so popular, right? Like in all those YA books of the time, is because people find it like really comforting and fun to like have the specific identity that they have. Like, oh, I'm a Hufflepuff District 12. Like they love to list these things, or even, we talked about Twilight too. It's more of a binary there, but like, oh, I'm a shapeshifter or I'm a vampire, right?
No, it's not that. That's not what's completely wrong about Twilight. It's not like I'm a vampire, I'm a werewolf. No, it's I'm Team Jacob or I'm Team Edward.
Or it's the team, right? It's the ship. But then that's a sort of different thing. Like then I'm thinking about Hunger Games has both of those things, like the districts, and then also are you Team Peter? Are you Team Gale? Is that his name? God, I haven't read those books in a while.
Yeah, no, it's Gale. Like, it's really funny, like, if you think about it, like, you close your eyes and you can just imagine either reading them. I still have the book set, and it's funnier because I remember, like, I was still in high school when those books were a big deal, and I remember, like, binge reading, like, the first books, trying to get it done before seeing the movie, like, minutes after finishing the book.
The other day, my sister was, like, cleaning out, like, an old bag that she found in our room, and she found my old Mockingjay pen that I had, which is pretty funny.
It's also really interesting to see like how generations change, like even in like 5 years, like people's like reading habits change. Like I guarantee you in about another like 5 years, Hunger Games will be very nostalgic again, and you'll see like a resurgence of the Hunger Games from the people that grew up specifically reading it. Same as with like, well, the Twilight thing passed. The best way to like judge it is also for people that go thrift shopping, like I do a lot. Go to the book section if that thrift store has one and look at how many copies of Harry Potter you can find. If there's none, that means people are buying it. Now count how many copies of Twilight do you see in the thrift store. Like there's actual dedicated shelves to Twilight because no one wants to read them anymore. Like I can easily pick up the whole series for like $3, right, if I want to.
Well, that's like the difference between like a zeitgeist of a cultural thing that was just popular at the time, and then people look back and go, oh, that aged kind of not great, as opposed to something that like stays relevant. J.K. Rowling aside and the things that she said online, but like those books are still really popular and the lessons in them are still really popular. We got super sidetracked, but
I think the point that we're trying to get across here is the idea of like when you categorize something, people feel like, as a kid, you want to be in a part of a group and a clique, rather than an adult, you're just like, do I really want to wear pants today to like the social function?
I mean, I think about that, how that's sort of a dangerous thing when you're younger, but also like a protective thing. Like you can strongly identify with a specific clique and that might make people dislike you for arbitrary reasons, but also it like you have a built-in sort of social network, even if that's like it's based on like things that aren't really that important, like the way you dress or the music you listen to or something like that. And maybe that's why it's so popular specifically in YA, because that's like a comfort to someone of that age. Like, oh, I know who I am. I know the kinds of people that I belong to. But then you see something like an example of this that demonstrates how that could backfire in the case of Percy Jackson. Like he doesn't have anybody who is like him, and even Tyson is not there because he's like a monster and not a demigod, and he has to go to like the bottom of the ocean to be forging weapons. Like he doesn't even have his half-brother with him.
So I'm not a sociologist, but I'm going to imagine that I am for 2 seconds. Let me just get comfortable in this armchair. Is that I would imagine the reason why people like kids are very like into groups and stuff, because in our brains, in our reptilian brains, we're so used to like back in caveman times, we're so used to being in our tribes and our groups that it's more comforting to like be in that group, and just you feel safe because what's better to be in that group instead of all the predators, aka like all the popular kids or like the unpopular kids or whatever group that you hate the most. It's like that's the predator, and you're kind of like, oh, if we flock together.
Yeah, an us versus them mentality is like your survival instinct, which I think speaks to why Bianca is behaving the way she's behaving, because even though that she has like this connection to her brother because they're related, she sees safety in numbers. She sees the Hunters of Artemis, and it's not just like this cool experience like, oh, I get to be a hunter and I get to live forever and all this. She understands the dangers implicit with being a demigod, and being with the hunters is like this protection against that. And I mean, it kind of shows that she doesn't care too much about what happens to her brother to some extent. I guess he'll be safe in Camp Half-Blood. I mean, you can't even say that though, because we know that bad things have happened to demigods who go to Camp Half-Blood.
Like, I really don't like to be on like the I hate Bianca bandwagon, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
a really spacious bandwagon. Just a little bit.
Yeah, it's shooting across the sky and then it disappears into a beam of light.
So that bandwagon is actually run by Apollo. Like, you just get on it and it just flies into the air. Like, whee!
And you just fly right into the sun.
Like, we'll get into it, but the idea that Bianca's a terrible person, again, obviously I'm not stupid. You have to have a character arc of a terrible person becoming less terrible.
Yeah, I'm sure that she'll realize that she's being kind of a jerk. That I hope that that's her arc.
You need to have that, or like, what's the point of having that character other than just having like Nico character motivation to being a better person? Like, my sister abandoned me, but I won't abandon these campers.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, like, in a story like this, like the hero's journey or whatever, where, like, a younger person with, like, a disproportionate amount of responsibility has to maybe make less than ideal decisions based on their own personal safety. Like, I'm thinking, like, oh, like, how old is Bianca, right? Is she 12 or something like that? If you were a 12-year-old and you knew that your life was destined to be incredibly dangerous, that monsters would be pursuing you forever, would you take up the offer to be immortal? Would you go with this group of people who are willing to accept you right away? I mean, even humans who have like way less stakes in their lives would immediately probably jump on board with a group of people who said, we accept you immediately.
One of us. One of us.
Yeah, like freaks.
So, like, Nico's taking, his abandonment well. Him and Percy go to the big house where he's going to meet Chiron for the first time, and Nico's like, what card is he? Because, his concept of mythology is from a card game.
Right, because of the mytho-magic. I always forget the name of his dumb fake.
It's called Mytho-Magic, which I want it to be an actual card game. Rick Riordan, get on it. Like, you'd make so much money from impressionable little kids. Like, I'd buy it. As a collector's item, heck yeah, I'd buy it. You get all the artwork from the guy that does all the covers, and yes, just do it.
You can always tell when something, like a piece of media, is made by a nerd, whether or not they have sort of a stand-in for Magic the Gathering or like Dungeons and Dragons or something similar to that. Like, you can tell that they're a nerd. Like, I always think about like Dungeons, and More Dungeons with Gravity Falls, like that's, or even like E.T. has a version of that. Stranger Things. I think Stranger Things just has D&D.
No, E.T. has Dungeons and Dragons.
E.T. just has Dungeons and Dragons.
That's actually Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, it's just like the same thing. But then the Stranger Things version is different.
We'll get way off topic if we talk about this, because I could talk about.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because you'll talk about Dungeons and Dragons for the rest of your life. I know.
Well, no, I could talk about just nerd culture in general, like, and how like it's changed. It didn't really become a facsimile until about late 90s. But then it really exploded. You
should cosplay Nico because he's a big fan of tabletop gaming.
Oh, I really enjoy Nico. So they actually go and meet Chiron, and the way they describe it is, there's snow everywhere, there's fire everywhere, and that, Chiron, it's the winter, so he's like being like super groovy. Like, he's got like the way I picture it is he's got shaggy hair, but he has like a perm because he's old.
A perm?
Yeah, he's got a perm. Or what is it? Jerry curls? Or what is it like when like the old time like 70s afro?
Well, yeah, the 70s were afros and then the 80s were Jerry curls. That was like sort of Michael Jackson's hair in Thriller. That's like a Jerry curl.
Well, I'm just saying it's like when you have like a businessman in the 70s with like very like frizzy hair.
I think that's just an afro, or like, I guess just a fro of non-specific origin.
And then we get to the most beautiful thing that, like, I would say that Michelangelo should have put this on the Sistine Chapel. And he is wearing a neon orange leopard print warm-up suit and purple running shoes. Like, this is like an aesthetic that I want to have.
I love the shade that Percy is throwing to, where he's like, as if Dionysus has ever ran anywhere, or whatever he says. He's also just like lazy, right? Because that's his whole shtick, is that he's like, he likes to relax, he likes to have some wine. He's not allowed to have some wine, but he sort of like lazes about and doesn't do anything. Finally, an argument with Mr. D, which I feel like should have happened last book, because he was terrible in Sea of Monsters, just like letting Tantalus like take over the camp and like not really caring about anything. Just like he's like moved beyond not caring to the point of like sort of reckless endangerment of the people that he's supposed to be responsible for. Like I really don't like him as a character.
Now, this is what I'll say, and this is that, one, I think the reason that Percy goes off at him is that Percy still is in shock that Annabeth may or may not be dead, and also that Dionysus is not treating Annabeth's death as something that should be, you know, treated with respect. He's just like, oh, finally another one. Oh, yes, thank God, it's all over. And he even gets her name wrong. Like, that's like the joke.
He gets her
with,
name
like,
wrong a couple times. And I guess he's supposed to be pretending that he didn't know her, so that's sort of like his way of seeming like he doesn't care. So that's an interesting, like, peek into his psyche. Like, why does he want to feign ignorance about her name? Like, why does he not want to seem like he cares?
Well, here's the reason. Dionysus is supposed to be at this camp for 100 years. The amount of kids that he sees die is probably higher than what Percy Jackson would think.
That's true.
So it's easier to like just be like, forget about them. It's like, it's the idea. It's like, you know what? I don't even bother knowing their names because they'll be dead before like I reach my 100 years.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he probably has some sort of level of weird trauma about it, right? I mean, he's also a god, so I don't know how he perceives like death and things like that, but he's seen a lot of people die, and maybe he's trying to like put on a persona of not caring, because if he did care, it would be like mentally exhausting to see all these kids die every day, which, I mean, that's kind of what Chiron has to deal with, because Chiron does care a lot, and he seems pretty like distraught at all of the people he's responsible for being constantly in danger.
Now, I guess maybe this might be the cynic in me, but I'm just thinking about this as like, after a while, because he's a god, he's just seen people die like in a blink of an eye. Like 100 years is just like a blink for Dionysus. It's such a normal thing of just seeing people just die that after a while you just stop caring about it. But then again, it's like the idea of like kids, and like the idea of like kids dying, like in any media, and like I guarantee, like in most media, like killing a kid is very, very taboo, unless you do it in a way that's like, I don't even want to say tasteful, but it's like done with respect. But here he's just like, yeah, Annabeth's dead.
Who's Anna? Who's
like,
whatever? Annabelle. Like he says all these different names.
So when I was reading that, I was thinking about Rick Riordan's like, well, I could like think of all the names that like moms try to say. It's like, oh, I really love that Annabelle character that you created for my kid.
Yeah,
like,
right.
All
Like
these people keep misremembering. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like Mr. D in contrast to Chiron, because they have like very similar positions in camp, and then Chiron does care a lot, and that probably is why he's so like demanding of the campers, like when they want to go on a quest or want to go and save Annabeth, and all of these, like this has happened 2 books in a row where Percy's like, I have to go and save my friend, I have to go and do this thing that is really important even though it's dangerous, and Chiron's like, you absolutely will not, you're grounded, mister, you're staying home.
Yeah, and that seems almost like a detriment to Percy Jackson. Like, oh man, like he needs to like really rely on his friends rather than, you know, kind of not facing the facts, but it's like, hey, there's a time and a place for everything, but right now is not the best time, as we'll find out.
It's kind of a fruitless thing on Chiron's part, because he's like trying to protect demigods, and that's like his whole job. He keeps them in this little place that's protected by the fleece, and he wants to keep the outside monsters outside, and just inherent in their except for when they like let them in, obviously, to train them, but still like inherent in their existence is they have to expose themselves to danger and go on these quests. And he's like, okay, but you only have to like follow the oracle, and you only have to do these specific dangerous things as according to the prophecy. You can't just do willy-nilly dangerous things that you want to do because you care about your friends.
So I don't think that about Chiron, because I think it's specifically about Percy Jackson, because if Percy Jackson dies before he reaches 16, or whoever reaches 16.
Right, so it's about the oracle. But he's also that way to Talia to some extent, too.
She's also a member of, remember, the prophecy is about a kid in the big 3. Like for what I'm thinking about is like Chiron would be perfectly happy, like putting them in like a room, chaining them to the walls, like Cask of Amontillado
yeah.
style,
Well, they would
and just
die
like wait until they get to 16. Well, no, he just feeds them food and
Yeah,
water.
just
What are you
like
talking
pushing
about?
Ambrosia like through a little hole in the wall.
Yeah, like he would do something like that just to ensure like the prophecy is kind of fulfilled, because again, he doesn't really do this to other campers. Like he gave Clarice a super secret mission that we could talk about. It's
Right,
like,
she went on the super secret mission. But I think that has to do probably with the prophecy. Again, like his perception of danger is like very specified to like whether it follows the what the oracle says or not. And I think like it's okay for Percy, for instance, to go on his quest in the first book because that's what the prophecy has spoketh or whatever. Like you're gonna go across the country, you're gonna do all of these things because that's what it says you're supposed to do. But you can't just like go and save your friend Annabeth because you want to. That's not like what is supposed to happen. Of course, he's probably not going to listen, because when has Percy Jackson ever listened to anybody?
Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, and like most of the Baudelaires, like if you put them in a support group, like they would not listen. They wouldn't go to that support group. They would go off and save their friends.
Well, that makes a good YA character, right? Because if, like, for instance, if I was a YA character and some authority figure was like, you shouldn't do this dangerous thing. It's dangerous. You should stay here where it is safe and good. And I would go, okay, I'm going to stay here. And then that's the end of the book. It was 3 pages long. But in order to actually have a plot, you need a character who's going to break the rules and actually, like, pursue the dangerous thing.
Well, it's like the idea of, like, you need to have a character that has, like, you know, productivity and kind of, like, is very, like, proactive in a lot of environments, or either they're forced to be proactive because you don't have a story. I mean, let's look at The Hobbit. The Hobbit's pretty much like a gigantic epic about a guy from Britain. Like, it's quintessentially like a hobbit, just a regular British person being thrown into like a super like epic fantasy.
And he's hesitant at first, but he still goes. That's the thing.
Well, he goes because the call of adventure like kicks him into gear, but when he's on the adventure, the only thing he cares about is being home and smoking on his porch. But then, when you look at Lord of the Rings, the only thing that he wants to do is go on another adventure. He's tired of being in retirement.
I think that Percy's definitely more of a Frodo than he is a Bilbo. You know what I mean? Like, he sees adventure and is like, yeah, I gotta do this. And he also has like a very strong sense of right and wrong too. And like
I don't consider Percy to be a Frodo or a Bilbo. I consider him to be a Samwise.
Oh, I guess. Well, because of his strong belief in friendship, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like, either. I was just specifically saying in terms of like their relationship to like the call of adventure, because I don't think Percy has ever shied away from doing the dangerous thing, and in fact will often elect to do the dangerous thing when it benefits someone he cares about. And that, again, that totally ties back to the thing you said about like the Samwise characterization. Like, yeah, he cares about Annabeth a lot, and that's why he wants to leave and save her even if he's not supposed to. He cares about Grover a lot. That's why he wanted to go to the Sea of Monsters and find him and bring him back and save him from the Cyclops. Like, these are things that he wasn't supposed to do, but he did because he cares about his friends.
And then we get the thing again is, you know, Percy's pretty much like short-tempered and all these things, and then Dionysus says all this stuff. And then Percy Jackson just goes off at him talking about how terrible he is and how he doesn't care. My favorite thing about this is Dionysus is just like, whatever.
He doesn't care, again, because of, like, the real or put upon, like, persona of not caring.
The only thing that he cares about, B, is my favorite thing is when Nico's like, oh my god, you're Dionysus, you're the wine dude. And Dionysus is like, the wine dude? It's like, yeah, you have like 500 attack points. Everyone says you're the lamest.
He's just like so befuddled by what happened that he doesn't even know what to say, which is perfect timing because Percy had just sort of like really scolded him with this sort of rant. Well, let me just like read actually what he says, because I'm glad he says it, because it kind of really bothered me how no one really was calling Mr. D out for a long time. Percy, Chiron's tone was full of warning. In the back of my mind, I knew Mr. D was not somebody to mess with. Even if you were an impulsive ADHD kid like me, he wouldn't give you any slack, but I was so angry I didn't care. You're glad to lose another camper, I said. You'd like it if we all disappeared. Mr. D stifled a yawn. You have a point? Yeah, I growled. Just because you were sent here as a punishment doesn't mean you have to be a lazy jerk. This is your civilization, too. Maybe you could try helping out a little. For a second, there was no sound, except the crackle of the fire. The light reflected in Mr. D's eyes, giving him a sinister look. He opened his mouth to say something, probably a curse that would blast me to smithereens, when Nico burst into the room, followed by followed by Grover.
Mr. Grover, that's Grover's father's name.
Yeah, that's his father's name. Yeah, and then Nico distracts him by talking about the mythomagic thing, which is a good timing. But I'm glad that Percy said that, because what the heck, Mr. D, you're a jerk.
Even though I love Mr. D, like, Percy Jackson does have a point, and especially when it comes to, like, Dionysus, if you remember in the first book, like, Percy looks into his eyes and he sees all these horrible things, like sailors turning into dolphins and people, like, exploding into grapevines. Dionysus might seem like a schlub, but he's a very powerful schlub.
Right, and he's experienced a lot of stuff. I mean, he's seen a lot in his day.
Quite essentially, he's just Bill Murray.
Bill Murray as Dionysus would be such a funny character.
Well, no, because he already is him. Like, what are you talking about? Like, all you need to do is just film it in his apartment, and he's like, oh, I'm Dionysus. That's good. Just get drunk, Bill Murray, and we're good to go. Percy's mad, Dionysus is mad, and Thalia takes him to the side, and they kind of start walking because, they need to tell everyone that the Capture the Flag game is going to happen, because every time the Hunters of Artemis come by, they have to have a Capture the Flag match.
A friendly Capture the Flag game, which, yeah.
Remember what happened last time?
Was that when the things were set on fire, when the cabins were set on fire, or was that a different time that they alluded to?
That might have been what happened. They just get super competitive, but remember the last time Percy Jackson played Capture the Flag?
It didn't go so well.
Oh, a lot of bad things happened. Remember there was a hellhound?
Right, that's like one of the first chapters of Lightning Thief.
Maybe Capture the Flag isn't the best thing, because so far we've actually had huge sports events in every one of the Percy Jackson books. First one was Capture the Flag. The other one was the big chariot race. Now we have some more Capture the Flag.
Always bad stuff happens. Almost never does it turn out well. Other than, I guess, the chariot race at the end of Sea of Monsters, but that's just sort of to, like, wrap things up, I guess. But there's nothing good is going to come of this Capture the Flag game. The Hunters of Artemis have so much animosity towards Camp Half-Blood and, like, the demigods themselves, and Talia has her, like, own thing against Zoe that isn't specified, but obviously has to do with, like, not being a big fan of the Hunters in general and wants to bring all the demigods to Camp Half-Blood, so there's, like, an ideological difference there. It's not going to be great.
Also that the Hunters of Artemis are super competitive against men, and seeing how most of the camp as they've described has been all men right now, like there aren't really any girls, because the only real girl that stays there all year round is on a secret mission right now. That is Clarice LaRue.
Percy goes around to all the cabins. I'm not sure why he does this. This is sort of just a plot device to get him to interact with a bunch of campers, because they announce the Capture the Flag thing at dinner anyway, but he goes around to all of the cabins talking about what was happening, and he goes to Aries' cabin, and like the kid almost slugs him because he's like, get away, I'm sleeping, whatever. But he takes the opportunity to ask where Clarice is, and he's like, oh, she's on a secret mission from Chiron, I can't tell you more. And she's missing in action too.
I think the reason why Rick Riordan had this is to add more world building, because you want to see more of the cabins rather than, them just going to like, oh, a specific cabin. Why not make it that Percy goes to all the cabins so you get a little more characteristics of each of the cabins?
Yeah, you got the description again of like the layout, and everything's like in a big U, and like all the cabins look disparate from each other based on the designs of each of the gods, and like which cabin has how many campers and all that.
I just finished rereading The Lightning Thief because I bought the illustrated version of it, and they have a very beautiful picture of what all the cabins look like, and they're very Greek and very like Americana, and I love it. So if you haven't seen that picture, it's pretty good.
I kind of hate that a lot of like the Percy Jackson movie has like colored my like imagination of the camp, because I'm sure it's like way more interesting than the movie portrays it. But I just like sometimes I'll just like see Logan Lerman in my head and be like, no, get out of here, not you.
The best way to put it is it's more summer campy, less epic fantasy-y, and that's what I like about it. Except here, we have the idea that, Clarice is on a secret mission, and that the most important thing, though, is that, Thalia and Percy finally kind of like apologize to each other after going around and making the rounds.
Right. They have like a whole deep conversation about like, some intense stuff.
They talk about like sadness, loneliness, death, drugs. So they get into like this deep conversation, and that's pretty much like Percy's like, I'm so sorry, Thalia, I should have waited for you. It's okay, don't worry about it. I would have done the exact same thing.
This is an intense convo happening.
The best way to put it is just to read it, because it's like we can't really do it any justice. We can only talk about the footnotes.
It's okay, Percy. I probably would have done the same thing. She shifted from foot to foot, like she was trying to decide whether or not to say more. You know, you asked me about my mom, and I kind of snapped at you. It's just, I went back to find her after 7 years, and I found out she died in Los Angeles. She was a heavy drinker, and apparently she was out driving late one night about 2 years ago, and Talia blinked hard. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, it's not like we were ever close. I ran away when I was 10. Best 2 years of my life were when I was running around with Luke and Annabeth, but still. And now Luke and Annabeth are, for different reasons, missing in her life, so it's quite a sad situation for Talia.
Now we have the exact same thing of I like to call Thalia as an orphan, so now we have the idea of she could do whatever she wants now.
Yeah.
Has no responsibility whatsoever. Like, the only people that she has is her dad, but her mom is, talk about like a terrible death, like drinking, driving, and debauchery.
Yeah, it's like a really tragic, horrible, and especially because she was missing during that time. Like, she finds out after the fact 2 years later that her mom had died, so she doesn't even really get to like mourn it properly. It just sort of happened in the past, and then, you know, she's thinking about Annabeth missing and about Luke, and all she has left is, I guess, Percy, and even, you know, I think that it's almost like that superhero trope of like, oh, I don't do friends anymore kind of thing, where it's like making attachments is really difficult when you have like life or death responsibilities, and that's kind of what I'm getting from Talia.
It's such a weird idea, the concept of like being in suspended animation, then waking up and thinking that everything is the same, especially like the idea of like, I'm going to go find my mom. And it turns out she's been dead for about 2 years. And it's the idea that she's also, I think they bring it up in the earlier books that her mom was like a really big like movie star. And that it's like the idea of it's like, oh, my mom was also a movie star because she wooed Zeus. So it's like even bigger. It's like the idea of it's like having like a destructive personality on top of like Thalia, who is just like at a suspended animation, who doesn't understand like how MySpace works because this is 2005, 2008. Yeah. Like she'd have such a big kick out of MySpace. Like she'd be like tagging her walls, like coding them to have like her favorite like Green Day songs or like Linkin Park or Dashboard Confessional.
But yeah, I feel really bad for Talia because she sort of gets the second chance at life, and then so much of it is taken away from her right away. You know, she finds out that Luke has been compromised, that he's on this like terrible war path to like bring the Titans back. She gets a little bit of time with Annabeth again, but then obviously Annabeth gets disappeared in like one of the earliest chapters in this book. And then she's left with, like, not even a parent. Her mom is gone in a very tragic way, long before she even wakes up. And her only other parent is a god who can't really talk to her or communicate with her in any meaningful way, usually.
So when I'm looking at this as how you structure a character, especially a kid character. And the idea is they have nothing else to lose, so they can gain whatever they want. Like, they can go on either side. It's the idea of, like, so Thalia is on, like, a neutral party. Like, she can either go to Luke's side or she go to Percy's side. Like, she has that decision now. Like, she doesn't have a responsibility to her parent, who is dead. She doesn't have a responsibility to Zeus because the only, like, loving he gave to her was he turned her into a pine tree instead of her dying.
Yeah, which, I mean, even that was terrible because him doing that made her lose whatever short time that she had with her mom before something tragic happened.
Well, no, because remember she talked about how she was perfectly fine with running away because her mom was an abusive drunk.
Yeah, so it's like a complicated relationship she has with her mom. Like, obviously there was reasons that she ran away, but then she also wanted to make that like reconnection, and then it's like a very tragic situation. And then we talk about how because it was a drunk driving situation, that probably relates to why she was so nervous when she was flying the bus with Apollo. And like that's just sort of seen as a slapsticky chapter in some ways, and they don't super go into like her motivations for why she's so nervous. And I mean, even just young kids are nervous when they start driving, and I talked about that last episode, but there's actually like sort of a traumatic reason why she'd be concerned about driving.
Oh, I mean, it's like one of those things where it's like there's a difference between driving on the road and driving a flying bus that's actually the sun.
Yes, there's also that. Yeah, it's like, okay, so you already have like very specific trauma related to driving, and now you're gonna fly the sun. Good luck.
I mean, there is a much different like perspective when it comes to like driving on the ground and driving like in the air, because getting a driver's license is a lot different than getting a pilot's license because you have so many other factors.
Because you're moving in more dimensions. You can go up and down also.
Also, especially it's a bus, so that's a different class of license altogether. So you're just, it's just a nightmare. But like that is a good reason like why Thalia was nervous. Again, it's like the idea of like, oh, my mom died this way. It's like one of those things where it's like the trauma is it's like, oh, my mom died in a car. No, I hate cars. But it's like the idea again. It's like, oh, what was it? The movie Soul Surfer, where the girl gets her arm bitten off, or was it leg? I can't remember. It's arm or leg. And she's like, I don't want to go in the water ever again. But the moral is I gotta get into that water and like face the shark. I know the movie isn't about her punching the shark.
Oh wait, yeah, I think I've heard of this movie.
Yeah. It's like the idea of it's like I have to get back in the water and I have to go surfing again, even though the entire movie should have been like a Moby Dick but on surfboards. I think would have been cool. And she's like riding a wave like an 80-foot wave, and she has a harpoon in the other. She's gonna throw it at the shark.
Like her searching for the shark. I will fight you with my one arm. So, I mean, that also is helpful narratively because we know that to some extent her nervousness about driving is related to her complicated relationship with her mom. So if you were to say at the end of this book, show her driving successfully, that would be a representative scene of her coping and learning to deal with what happened with her mom. So like you have like a perfect metaphor built into the situation.
It's kind of like the idea of like, was it the caged bird? At the end you let the bird free because you believe in freedom.
Yeah, it's built into whatever, like it's any kind of example like that. I feel like superheroes are a good example, like, oh, I can never do this thing because of what horrible thing happened, but then they end up going to that place. I mean, it's literally like CBT to some extent, like, oh, I have trauma around this specific thing, so I'm gonna do that thing and show that I've conquered my fear. I mean, I like stories like that sort of reckon with the emotional impact of having like these extraordinary powers, because you're still like, I mean, for the most part in those kinds of stories, even if you're a superhero or a demigod or whatever you are, you still have like the psyche of a human. So even though you can like control water or you can like make lightning bolt appear out of thin air, that doesn't mean that you'll be any more adept at dealing with something terrible happening. And then it's obviously your life is much more fraught than any normal person's life because people are always dying.
It's the idea of like you have all these powers, but your main flaw is you have the, weaknesses of a human. So it's like you see all these terrible things. Obviously, as a human, you're going to react to them in a different way than just dealing with them with your superpowers, because, there's only so much that superpowers can do compared to like, oh, yeah, I'm kind of effed up in the brain because like, I saw my uncle die, and it's actually my fault because, I didn't like beat up the bad guy. Peter Parker. Spider-Man's like one of my favorite examples because the reason why he fights crime is because he feels guilty, because when he gets his powers in the Sam Raimi one, he uses them for selfish reasons. He's going to be in the cage fight, and he's going to get the car, and he's going to win over Mary Jane. And then when Uncle Ben dies, he's like, oh, I could have used my powers for good. The only time he really kills somebody is when he kills the confronter of Uncle Ben, even though he's not really him, because in Spider-Man 3 he's actually Sandman. It's a complete train wreck.
Yeah. No, it's also like interesting when you think about someone who has powers, whether it be magic or otherwise, and something terrible happens to, say, like a mortal person in their life. I think that might be more psychologically difficult because you have all this power and there's like this sense of like, oh, I could have done something. Like you could have this like amazing ability to like fight literal gods and fight against monsters, but you still can't stop certain terrible things from happening. And that's like sort of an interesting, hopeless, helpless feeling. Both heroes and villains have tragic backstories. Luke is not very much different than Talia or than Percy or Annabeth. The difference is in the decisions they make after the traumatic thing happens. They see all this death and destruction happen. They see children die. They see the implications of this like broader, complicated system of gods who make decisions for them and like the prophecies that they have to live by. And they have to reckon with that. And I think in taking away, like you said, everything from Talia, you know that she could be anything. This could be her tragic backstory of her becoming a hero and helping Percy and saving people and fighting against the Titans and fighting against Luke, or she could take his side.
Yes, because she has nothing to lose and she has everything to gain. Because, again, it's the idea, in the old-timey idea of, like, if you're going to have an adventure story, you have to kill off the parents because then the kids can do whatever they have carte blanche onto whatever they want to do. And that's the most important thing that I love about Talia is that, her mom's dead, but, like, she still moves on. She isn't, like, a sad mopey mope. Even though the way they describe her in this chapter is it's all white, but all she wears is black.
The contrast, like, even the way she doesn't fit in, right? They talk about that, like, the contrast of the landscape with what she's wearing, like, it just represents how she doesn't even feel like she belongs there. She probably doesn't feel like she fits in because she literally was a tree for like years, and then she wakes up and everything is different, and she doesn't fit in because she's like of a different time, sort of like everything has changed while she was gone.
She's Captain America.
Yeah, that's true. She's Captain America. Or she's like, I don't know, like
She's Bucky Barnes. She's the Winter Soldier. Oh my god.
Yeah, exactly. There's like so many examples of people who are like in some sort of suspended animation, they wake up, or like even something like Rip Van Winkle, like you sleep for years and then you wake up and everything is different. And she's like of a different time, even though it's only been a few years, but so much has changed since then because of like all of the stuff going on with all the gods.
Like my favorite example of this is actually Peter Quill in Guardians of the Galaxy, and that, in your eyes he's this big, magnificent, hero, he's funny and stuff. Then you get to Infinity War and you forget that his entire idea of like what human culture is still in the 80s, and he meets Spider-Man and Iron Man and he comes off as the biggest jerk, but because his side of the story, he isn't really that big of a jerk. Sorry, people, but like, I like Peter Quill.
Yeah, you're just like defending all these different superheroes.
I do, because it's like, for me, I like that idea. But it's like the idea of it's from another person's perspective. You see Peter Quill's story, and then you see it from an outside perspective with Iron Man and Spider-Man, and you see him come off as the biggest jerk. But that's just who he is.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens with Talia, because I could easily see her becoming some sort of villain and maybe having a redemption arc, or like there's really a lot that could happen because she's been through so much. And even like there's like a really sad introduction to this conversation because she stopped by the armory and looked out across the valley toward the top of Half-Blood Hill. Her pine tree was still there, the golden fleece glittering in its lowest branch. The tree's magic still protected the borders of camp, but it no longer used Talia's spirit for power. "Percy, everything is unfair," Talia muttered. "Sometimes I wish—" She didn't finish, but her tone was so sad I felt sorry for her. With her ragged black hair and her black punk clothes, an old wool overcoat wrapped around her, she looked like some kind of huge raven, completely out of place in the white landscape. Like, she clearly in some ways wishes that she was back where she was. She actually regrets being brought back to life because everything is so wrong.
It kind of reminds me, I might be like misquoting this, but in The Bride of Frankenstein, like my favorite line is actually the last line spoken by the monster, and I believe it's "We're better off dead." And then the whole castle explodes.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Like she, in some ways, just wishes that nothing had been changed. Like you'd think like, oh, I'm ecstatic. Like I was trapped in a tree to have my life saved by my god dad or whatever. It's like a very complicated situation, but that sounds like a prison. But now that she's alive again and everything is so different and all of her best friends are either missing or they're evil or her mom has died, like she like really doesn't have anyone left.
It's the idea of, it's almost like survivor's guilt, almost, of just like, why do I get to survive when my mom and all these people like wither away? It's like the same idea with like the locust.
And then it's funny because Annabeth had survivor's guilt last book about Talia, so they have survivor's guilt about each other. Right? Did you notice that? That just occurred to me because now that she's missing, now like Talia feels really guilty that what happened to Annabeth, and like that's probably why she snapped at Percy to some extent. There's other stuff going on, but then it's so funny because then like literally last book, it's Annabeth talking about what happened with the Cyclops and how like she feels guilty about how Talia then, or not with, well, there's the Cyclops in the city, but then there's what happens at Camp Half-Blood where she becomes the tree, and like obviously Annabeth feels guilt about that. So it's weird that they both have the same trauma about each other based on different times they thought the other person was dead.
It just sounds like an episode of like Days of Our Lives, like Annabeth's gonna come back with amnesia.
Right. Yeah, that would be such an interesting layer if Talia had come back to life, but she only remembered everything that happened before and like didn't, or even like just didn't remember any of the stuff leading up to when she became a tree. So it'd just be like, who are you?
Or you know what? The bigger twist is she still thinks she is a tree.
She just stands there. Well, even Percy says that sometimes she stands so still that he's like, oh, maybe she still is a tree.
Like she's like, put me back into the earth, and I put her in like a flower pot, and they put soil. That's better. And like that's how like she sleeps in like a T pose.
Them's the copes, right? She just like digs her feet into the ground and is like, I'm still a tree. It's like, Talia, we gotta do some stuff. Can you stop playing around?
No, I am tree now. I am Groot.
Man, we've gotten so into the stuff about Talia that we haven't even gotten to the Tyson stuff.
Well, that's because Thalia is a really good character. Like, you might not realize it, but like, Thalia is like one of the more interesting dynamic characters because much like Percy Jackson, she has all these interesting like inner dynamics. And the most interesting thing about her is we don't have a perspective chapter into her head. We only can see her observations through the eyes of Percy Jackson.
At the very least, we get to hear from the perspective of Percy, but we don't even know like what she's thinking.
Yes, and which makes it a more interesting, like dangerous type of character.
Man, this whole chapter is literally just like, look at what you did. You ruined a perfectly good kid. It's got anxiety now. Like that's like every child in this camp.
Do you have the receipt? No? Oh, then I guess I can't return it.
Yeah, it's just all the like implications of the bad stuff that happens, like how Percy's all messed up and Talia's all messed up.
So she's like, wake me up when winter ends, and she walks away, and Percy kind of like goes back to his cabin, and there's something new about his cabin. It's got a water fountain.
Yeah, a little like trickling fountain that is warm for some reason, and that makes the mist, which allows him to make a phone call, which is kind of like this weird passive aggressive thing, like, don't forget to call your family. Here, I give you a phone just so you can call me.
Yeah, this is where like he throws the coin in. He's like, operator, gets me Tyson. Because my favorite thing about this though is the first person, you know what, I should call my mom. He's like, nah.
No, she's not worried yet.
No, it's like the idea. It's, you know what? I should call my mom and tell her that I'm okay. Like, she's probably still driving, and she probably thinks everything's A-okay. But you know what? I'm going to call Tyson. You know what? I could call my dad, but you know what? I'm sure it's going to cost a little extra, so I'm going to call Tyson.
And then he also even says, he doesn't even know if he can call his dad. He's like, my father? It had been way too long, almost 2 years, since I'd actually talked to him. But could you even send an Iris message to a god? I'd never tried. Would it make them mad, like a sales call or something?
I just imagine this goes, bring, bring. Oh, hi, Dad. I'm just calling to say hi. I know you're an awful person, but I really want to talk to you. This is my Percy Jackson
like really
voice.
He sounds like the most like squeaky voiced teenager.
But also he's like 13 now. It's like he's getting up there in age. So now his voice is cracking.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways I was imagining like a very like Buddy the Elf thing of like, I'm here,
hi, Dad,
and you're my dad, and I'm singing like.
See, that's a sequel where Percy Jackson decides to go up to Mount Olympus and just be like, you're my dad.
Yeah. I mean,
like
literally both of them are on the Empire State Building. Just saying.
Yes. And, you know, Percy's like, he takes the water to get there. And he's like, Mr. Narwhal, bye, Percy. Hope you find your dad. Thanks, Mr. Narwhal.
I mean, yeah, he would also be friends with narwhals now that I think about it. Only instead it's like Rainbow, the seahorse. What are they called again? The hippocampus being just like, bye, Percy, hope you find your dad.
Funny enough, it's the same narwhal, like stop animation. It's the exact same thing.
That's how the universes are connected with the narwhal. Wow, there's like too many things in common, actually, with the stories.
We'll probably end up talking about it next Christmas, how Buddy the Elf is secretly a demigod.
Oh my god. Okay, well, let's not get into that too much.
That's a BuzzFeed article waiting to happen.
Get your gifts ready, folks.
Number 3 will surprise you.
So yeah, he sort of like hems and haws about who you should call. And he's like, well, I guess Tyson. That's probably good. Because he also talks a little bit about how his like shield is all messed up. So I guess he's just thinking about Tyson, how like all the different engravings and things got dented by Dr. Thorne.
Now, here's the more interesting thing. This is just me because I was looking at plot holes. If Annabeth is like mysteriously just disappeared, she's not dead, why doesn't he try to send her an iris message?
I don't know. There's probably some sort of magical thing, though, like a barrier put up.
Well, they never explained it, so that's just like a weird plot hole thing. Like, you would imagine, like, he would try to do something about it. So Percy Jackson calls up Tyson, and Tyson's like, working 9 to 5, trying to make a Cyclops living.
Making swords. I love the description of him making swords because it's like very like visceral. The scene of him like, oh, he obviously isn't harmed by fire, so he just picks up like a burning hot sword and is like, I made this like a child.
Well, I love the idea always of it's like when you have a character that's like a fish out of water, no pun intended, and then like all of a sudden like he's in his element, such as the forges, and he's the most competent person. Like we've talked about this in the last book about the island, but here's like he's really in his element, and he just has like a big like arts and crafts session where like he's just having a fun time telling Percy about all the cool things like he's made. And then here's like Percy with like his shield that's been all broked up by like Dr. Thorne. It's like the saddest description.
Yeah, he's
like
really like sad about it because it's not just a shield. It's also like now it doesn't work as well because it won't open completely. And like all the engravings that represented what they did in Sea of Monsters are like distorted.
Yeah, and also it probably doesn't tell time either now.
Yeah, right? It's just like sort of a not even a great watch.
No, it's kind of sucks now. But it's the thought that counts. And of course it helped Percy, get poisoned. But it still protected, his vital bits.
His vital bits. Yeah.
Though, we have Tyson here and he's kind of talking about how it's like, Percy's like, have you talked to Dad recently? Daddy's kind of busy. He's kind of like getting ready to fight a war.
Yeah, the war thing is interesting. So I guess we kind of knew that stuff was brewing because what was it? The stirring is the whole thing with all of the monsters. And then obviously there's the stuff with Luke and like the Titans. And then now we find out that there's also like other old gods, is it? What are they exactly? Like sort of rulers of
the Titans.
Yeah, they're just Titans, I guess. Yeah, other Titans who like used to rule the ocean before Poseidon.
Well, we have the idea now. It's like the idea of like people are thinking about the Titans again, so now they're stirring.
Cause, yeah, it's like the power of thinking about them makes them come back because there's of like weird like ancient Greek logic or whatever.
Yes, it's exactly like The Secret.
Or like Voldemort too, like like saying his name has power, thinking whatever. Like it's a similar idea. Like ideas have power.
So Kronos is rising, and also his brothers are rising. So we have the god Oceanus waking up. That just sounds like a boss. We're gonna fight Oceanus.
It also sounds a little bit like someone's OC. Like this is my very cool ocean-based character named Oceanus.
Yeah, they ride like a black seahorse. It has a spike. Very gothic. Wow. It's funny because I'm thinking about this, and then I just saw Aquaman recently, and I'm just thinking about those epic sea battles. Oh god, that movie was unique.
Unique is a nice way to put it. I didn't see it for a lot of reasons.
Oh, it was a unique movie, but it's funny.
Yep.
Like,
didn't look very good to me.
The only reason why I love that movie is the main villain, Ocean Master. Like halfway through the movie, he looks like Bible Man, and I couldn't get that out of my head, and I was laughing so hard.
Oh my god. Okay, so yeah, this is the interesting thing about Tyson, like giving us exposition, is the way that he talks. So he's like very like simplistic in the way he describes it. Tyson sighed. He stuck the sword blade out the window, where it made a cloud of boiling bubbles. When Tyson brought it back in, the metal was cool. Old sea spirits making trouble. Igonos, Oceanus, those guys. Like, he just sort of is like, you get the idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's a unique thing that, we have these gods coming back, or I guess we have this idea now that Titans are coming back, and that Poseidon's actually kind of getting nervous, because you're getting ready for this war.
He has to make a bunch of swords, like, for the mermaids, which is a
That's
very
so
metal thing to do.
I'm just imagining now that like, they're arming, like, Ariel, like, armed to the teeth with, like, swords, armor, and, oh, God, it's so awesome.
Look at this thing. What do you call them? Swords. I want to stab. I want to kill.
I'm just, like, imagining, like, they're, like, arming the Narwhal Battalion.
Yeah, well, the narwhals don't need to be armed because they already have horns.
Well, yes, but they give them armor, and they look cool.
Right, they put metal on the outside of their horns.
Well, actually, secretly, narwhals are like cyborgs, like they're like the Terminator, like you scratch them.
Right, so the horn opens up and the metal spike is underneath.
Yes. Do 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 do.
No, just thinking about that scene in Shape of Water.
Yeah, no, like they're getting like armed to the teeth. Like I'm just imagining. Okay, this just sounds like a metal album. They're arming mermaids. They're now arming narwhals for some weird reasons. What about the whale battalion, B? I need to know. Like, did the whales get torpedoes? Like, what do whales get?
Whales get I don't know. They get do they get something like in their blowhole? They just like shoot like a bazooka out of or something. Yeah, so he says the thing about the war, and then he, where's the thing about mermaids? I can't find it. Oh, here it is. Tyson shook his head sadly. We are arming the mermaids. They need 1,000 more swords by tomorrow. So there's over 1,000 mermaids with swords. What an image.
So what ends up happening is, Tyson gets yelled at, like, his foreman's like, get back to work, as he shakes his hand. It's like, sorry, Percy, gotta go.
Well, Tyson's like a good exposition deliverer here because of his specific language barrier, because he just the way he speaks is very simplistic, and that I think makes it less obvious what's happening. He just sort of gives a little simple rundown, there's these guys, these titans, and I gotta make some swords for mermaids anyway, then good luck. There is also an opportunity for him to ask where Annabeth is, and then Percy has to get a lump in his throat, oh geez, I can't tell him that Annabeth is missing, he'll start crying, so he just has to be like, she's fine, she's somewhere else right now.
Could you bring her out? And he's like, she's off on the side, and he starts speaking in a higher pitch. Oh, hi Tyson. I can't. I'm tying my shoe right now. Oh.
Like in a Toy Story 2 with the arm. Hey, buddy.
Yeah, with the arm. It's exactly.
You're my
that.
best friend.
Oh, and then the arm that Percy has distracting Tyson falls off, and you just see him screaming as the Iris message.
Oh god, I hope he doesn't have Annabeth's arm, because that would not bode well.
No, he thinks that Annabeth's arm just fell off. He can't conceive the idea that she's not there.
Right, she just doesn't have an arm.
Oh, I love that. So Percy Jackson's kind of in silence. He's like, you know what? Time to go to bed. Time to put on my jammy jams.
Well, right. Well, they have dinner, and that's sort of we already talked about this scene with Nico and Bianca, and how they all deal with sitting at their respective tables in camp, and that this sort of sets up the dynamic of who we're dealing with, all the campers who are there, who belongs to what cabin, how Bianca's adjusting to being with the Hunters of Artemis, and then just at the very end there's a mention of the capture the flag thing, which is that's going to be fraught with all sorts of stuff because of the different things that different cabins have against each other, and then the hunters are involved. So there's a lot going on that I know that the next chapter is going to be a nightmarish capture the flag thing with fire and bad things happening and arrows being shot at Percy. It's going to be a lot.
So the next chapter opens up. We lost 5 of our campers, most of them to the gangrene. It's just it's merciless.
Shot with thousands of arrows.
Yes. Oh my god, the Hunters of Artemis shoot a bunch of arrows into the sun. Percy, why did the sun get so dark? Oh, good God.
They hit Apollo.
No, it's in 300, the Persians' arrows blot out the sun.
Right, yeah.
Then we'll fight in the shade.
Yeah, and then this is, very par for the course with a lot of Percy Jackson chapters is we get a spooky vision dream. What's Percy Jackson without a spooky vision dream?
You would think that, Percy Jackson, sleep schedule would be, completely trucked.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to bed and see something horrible happening to my friends, probably. Statistically speaking, I'll go to bed and see something horrible happening to my friends or my dad.
Remember when I used to have nice dreams? Now it's just I go to sleep and it's well, how can I be depressed in the morning?
Yeah, basically. I feel if I were him, I would just be I'm gonna take a melatonin and hope I just peace out and not have any dreams.
No dreams. Oh man, that'd be nice. So yeah, so he goes to sleep and he wakes up and he's like, oh my god, I'm a spooky ghost and I see Annabeth. And she's in this dark, creepy place with Luke. And Luke's in pain because he's holding up this dark entity.
Yeah, because they're in sort of a cavernous cave thing, and he's just holding up this roof that's collapsing.
Yes, and he's like, Annabeth, help me, I'm dying, oh it hurts, oh the pain, oh my leg.
Yeah, right. It's like so like fake and ridiculous. And you know that Annabeth is predisposed to wanting to help Luke because of all of like the trauma bonding that they did when they were swashbuckling younger kids, like fighting monsters together on the streets.
Yes, and also she kind of loves him.
Right, that's true also.
And I love that the idea is like Percy Jackson's like yelling at her and she's like, kill him, let him die. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, right? Like, I would be so frustrated because he obviously can't do anything. He's watching in suspended animation, like, in a dream. It's always a question, too, when it comes to these dreams, like, how much of this is, like, an exact parallel to reality? Like, is it a vision or is it just a dream that represents what's happening? Like, it's hard to say.
It's the idea that, the ancient Greeks believed that dreams were like a prophecy.
Well, I mean, the thing about Percy Jackson, though, is sometimes dreams, like in the example of Sea of Monsters, when he has the empathy link with Grover, those dreams aren't dreams, really. They're more like direct corollaries to what's happening because he's like connected to Grover where he could see the literal things that are happening. Well, like in the example of Lightning Thief, and I think also here, it's more like prophetic visions that aren't one-to-one to what's happening in reality. But I don't know. I'm just guessing.
So when it comes to dreams in Percy Jackson, the only one that's coming to my head that would be considered a dream is the one in the second book where Percy like wakes up on the Princess Andromeda and he sees Thalia in a straitjacket. And so it's like the idea that there's kernels of truth in it because he now knows what Thalia looks like. You know what? I retract my statement because I just remembered in Lightning Thief, the first dream that Percy gets is the one where it's the eagle fighting the horse on the beach.
Right, yeah, and that's completely metaphorical.
But the kernel of truth in that dream is that, it's Poseidon fighting Zeus. Like, there's some kernels of truth. Like, it's like one of those things where dreams can be helpful, but only when Rick Riordan wants them to be helpful, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. You, like, literally don't know how much reality is being reflected in the dream at the time until you actually get to what happens. So it's like foreshadowing, but not direct, usually. Unless it's Sea of Monsters. Sea of Monsters was all of the stuff with Grover was actually happening.
Personally, I really enjoy this writing device of getting more information when the character sleeps because to a kid that like makes you want to read more because the main character is getting information that would probably take until the end of the book to get. And I like that a lot.
Right. It like hints more towards like larger things that are happening in the plot.
Yes, and it's an easy way to like deal with like big like plot points very quickly and like you just have them in the back of your head.
Right, exactly. Because otherwise, how would you express this going on? Like, how would he find out that something bad is happening to Annabeth specifically in this way? Like, he'd have to have a character explain it, or there's like some sort of plot device you need to write in to get this information relayed to him.
What would be the idea of like the iris message? He turns it on and like Annabeth is just screaming, and he's like, oh, I think I have the wrong number. Click.
Yeah, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope, or whatever, like, just appears on the iris message for a second and then disappears. Like, those are the only kinds of things I could picture as far as, like, him knowing what's actually happening, because he's separated from her, and he's also barred from leaving camp. He's probably going to leave camp, but he's told not to.
Though my favorite thing about this is that Percy in his dream is trying to yell at Annabeth, and he's like, just let him die. It's like, normally when you have a kid, we have a character that's like, their idea is like, you don't kill. Percy Jackson like completely ignores that. And he's just like, you know what, just let him die. Just walk away, Annabeth, please.
Yeah, that's really frustrating. It's sort of like the I have no mouth, but I must scream thing of him just watching in horror and knowing that she shouldn't do that. And we knew that this was destined to happen to some extent because Annabeth has a connection to Luke, and this is actually really reminiscent of what happens in Sea of Monsters too, where she gets like tricked by the sirens, like giving her this alternate version of the world where she can be with Luke again, and that she lives in this perfect version of New York City that she's like redesigned in her own imagination. And it's like she's very tempted by like an alternate version of events where things aren't terrible, basically.
Yes, and what ends up culminating because of this is, Annabeth being gullible because, Luke probably threw a dictionary that said gullible and just was a picture of her. She, like, takes the load off of whatever Luke is holding, and she's like, oh my god, it hurts, it's so much pain. And she's like, Luke, are you going to help me? And he's like, oh, don't worry, your help's coming soon. And he just starts cackling and walks away.
I hate to say I told you so.
Yes, it's a matter of I told you so, but my favorite part of this chapter, which pretty much sums up the whole arc of just Percy Jackson, is these two sentences. I'm sure of two things. Annabeth was in terrible danger, and Luke was responsible.
I mean, exactly. So he kind of explains the dream there. He doesn't say, oh, this is literally happening, but he gets the gist of what it means.
Yes, and the idea is, for some reason Luke volunteered to do this thing and was tricked, and that Annabeth is now holding this mysterious burden, and now something else is going to happen. It's a very unique thing, and I love talking about this.
I don't even know what this could mean. Like, is she literally in a cave? Like, I honestly have no idea what's happening. I have a lot of questions.
So, B, it's now that time of the week again. What is the name of the next chapter?
Chapter 6 is An Old Dead Friend Comes to Visit.
Oh, no. What is that supposed to mean?
No one's died yet, though.
A couple people have died or have been dead.
Oh, wait. Is Hades dead? He's not dead. He just lords over the dead, right?
That's possible. That's one. But, there are other people that have died in Percy Jackson.
Oh, I guess, yeah. I mean, like, Talia's mom.
That's one.
Is one.
But she's not a friend to Percy.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Well, neither is Gabe, though, and he's also dead. Is it like a monster that he killed? Because I'm thinking, like, oh, they always reappear, and then I don't know who else it could be.
There is plenty of speculation. We're probably going to find out next week. What do you think is going to happen next chapter, B?
Old dead friends come... Like, I don't even know who that friend could possibly be, or what they mean by dead. I mean, we know that obviously there's going to be a capture the flag thing that's going to happen next chapter, because that's supposed to happen, quote-unquote, tomorrow. So he's going to wake up and have to... Well, he already wakes up in the last chapter, because he realizes... But it's only, like, midnight when he has the nightmare. Then they have to have the capture the flag thing with Hunters of Artemis, and that's going to be fun for everyone. I'm sure. Just a complete disaster of people having... like, taking it way too seriously, almost like high school, really, or middle school, when we would play Capture the Flag, and people would just take it very seriously.
What, people taking things seriously in high school? What is this? AP classes? Badooch.
Yep. Advanced Percy.
The most serious people that I've ever met in my life took AP classes, and then going to college, it was nothing like that, which is funnier.
It's true. AP classes are nothing like college. I don't know what's going to happen other than that. Percy's probably going to try to talk to Talia about Annabeth. Because he's going to maybe... Or I don't know, because Percy's weird with his emotions, and sometimes he doesn't talk about his spooky prophetic dreams, even though they're always important, and he should always talk to his friends about it. But hopefully he goes to Annabeth and Grover at some point and tells them his visions about what's going on with Annabeth... Or not Annabeth and Grover, to... Hey, Annabeth, you're in danger. Sorry. Hopefully he goes to Talia and Grover.
It's like a joke. It's like, hey, Annabeth and Grover. Thalia's like, I'm Thalia. Oh, I keep forgetting. I'm always
like, right. You're the girl one, right? Okay. Anyway, girl one is gone. You're the other one. You're gonna help me save her.
Yeah, it's something like that because you're so used to like Percy, Annabeth, Grover. Now it's Percy, Thalia, Grover. It's like, oh, it throws off the flow of the team. It's like when they got rid of Brock in Pokemon for a season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they upped the stakes and they swapped out regular Annabeth for goth Annabeth, and so like. I'm just imagining Percy Jackson exactly the same, but he just calls Talia goth Annabeth.
You know what, B? You're joking, but it's actually a thing that might happen.
He's like, hey, so you with the pants and the hair and all that. Come on, you with the Green Day t-shirt. Let's hit the road. We gotta get the other girl one. I don't remember her name either. Annabelle. Come on.
Yes. So they're gonna talk to them possibly about their emotions because this is what they do in kids' books. They sit around in a circle and they talk about, well, I drew a flower today, but then the flower died. And then I cried for about 6 hours. What about you, Thalia? I listened to Green Day and I cried my eyes out. It was good.
Yeah, listen to My Chemical Romance. God, we really roast Talia on a regular basis, but I also was that kid, so I have no place to talk. Glass houses, throwing stones.
I might roast Thalia, but inside I'm roasting myself.
No, it's true, yeah. Yeah, other than that, I don't really know what's going to happen.
So we didn't get any messages or reviews this week, I think because maybe it's still Christmas break / the New Year's. Happy New Year, everybody. B, where can they find you?
You can find me on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com, and you can find me on Twitter at bkellygorman, and on Instagram at bkellygorman.
If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Suda41, that's SUDA41. If you want to follow our show on Twitter, that's at halfblood_radio. If you want to email our show, you can email us at radiocamphalfblood@gmail.com. We'll read any messages that you send to us. And you can also subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/RadioCampHalfBlood. And we're going to be doing a review very soon of Ready Player One by Ernest Cline.
Yeah.
We also have t-shirts available at TeePublic. Just go to Radio Camp Half-Blood. And that's pretty much it. Well,
I think that's it.
I'm Zach.
I'm B.
And keep staying mortal. Bye.
Bye, guys.